A little bit further on whether or not on this day there is still something to celebrate, especially for the workers. Joining us in the conversation, Young Nurses Indaba Trade Union President Sicina, National Union of Mine Workers Deputy President Vilakazi, Labour expert Terry Bell, and South African Democratic Teachers Union's spokesperson Xolani Fakude. We also have NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. You're part of the conversation tonight. You can tweet us at Newzroom 405 or otherwise send us your WhatsApp messages now on 072-110-5584. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. We have a very large panel of 5, so I am going to be a little bit tight with time. So don't feel bad if I jump in, so that we can give everybody an opportunity to be able to be heard in this conversation on this Labor Day. Phakamile, let me start with you. I mean, if you look at the latest numbers that were released around 2020, for example, on the impact of strikes, right? You've got in 2018, workers lost an estimated 266 million in wages due to strike activity. You found that more workers were involved in labor disputes. You found that the number of work stoppages was on a rise, particularly in the private sector. But you found that most strikes were happening in the public sector, but the no work, no pay principle seems to have certainly hit the employer and the employees as well. The demands are still the same. It's over wages, it's over bonuses, it's over compensation benefits, grievances lodged against employees, and unpleasant working conditions. Looking at all that, would you say unions have been relevant actors in shaping the workplace over the last decade? Phakamile, yeah, you can take that.
You broke up a little bit when you were asking the question. What is the one question?
Have unions been relevant actors in shaping the workplace over the last decade?
Oh, absolutely. Unions are relevant, and in fact, they're more important now than they've ever been. When you consider the relentless attack on workers' benefits and conditions that are taking place, not just in South Africa, but all over the world, there is a lot of debate on this day. Statistically speaking, when you look at the fact that there's high numbers of workers that are not unionized, that somehow that suggests that unions are not relevant, that's not true. If anything, what it suggests is the impact of the capitalist system and how relentless it's been on workers. The biggest changes that we've seen in recent years is a dramatic shift where both the private and public sector are casualizing labor, where they're basically replacing permanent contracts with temporary contracts. And that makes organizing labor very difficult. We've experienced a lot of union bashing, both on the side of the state and in the private sector. Certainly in South Africa, you've got an ANC government that's bashing workers, that denied public sector workers their deserved increase, and has basically, opted out of a collective agreement, sending a message to the private sector that you don't have to take collective bargaining seriously. So there really has been a sustained attack on the working class and on workers in general. And this is why trade unions are more important now than they've ever been before.
Binda, let's bring you in. I hope you can hear me. Please unmute for us there. But Vilakazi, would you say, as the unions, you have successfully negotiated, especially in the last decade, all the important elements of employment conditions, right? Securing wage increases, for example. Let's start there. We'll touch on the others.
Well, thank you very much. I think Terry, Rich, Majola, and Faku, good evening. You see, without further ado, the situation is very challenging to the extent we are observing a very serious shift of this interest in terms of the contestation of class issues. The working class and the poor are the victim of corruption that is seen in the public sector, in the SOEs, and the Zondo Commission to this effect is alluding to the points where majority of the cash that is supposed to give service to the people, which is their constitutional right, is been denied. When coming to workers, the situation is extremely bad, and allow me to tell you why. There is this thing of us promoting the elements of contractors who are definitely ignoring the basic needs of workers, which is provident fund, medical aid, transport, and housing. We are negotiating with employers who think they know the union better, because in their majority, some are historically union leaders. We want to allude very clear that for workers, insofar as the current situation is concerned, I agree with Majola to say is the time where workers must unite. It's not about how skillful an individual may think he is. It is the time where our unity as a class will tell any thief in all forms, in private and public sector, that we are watching you and we are on you. This thing of denying workers their increase in the private sector, this thing of continuing to ignore people like Neil Froneman, who think he's a small god in South Africa, who is denying workers a 1,000 wage increase, which all gold-producing companies have given 1,000 as a wage increase. We cannot allow a situation like that, and we have been saying to government, this man wrote an article where he says South Africa is a collapsed state. You can imagine a CEO of a company under the minerals that are under the stewardship of government, saying as he wish, and his government that has issued licenses for the kind of mines like Sibanye under Neil Froneman's leadership. We cannot have people who are bigger than life in our time.
All right, we'll come back and touch on a number of those issues that you are raising. Xolani, Fakude, Rich, Sicina, as well as Cherry Bell will weigh in on this as well tonight. Your Workers' Day conversation continues now here on In Focus as we look at the role of unions in the last decade, particularly in negotiating those rather critical elements that are required for successful working conditions. Terry, let's bring you in here. I mean, the question is not whether or not unions are relevant and whether they will continue to be relevant. Maybe we can talk about that by and large. But let's talk about their role in the last decade, particularly when it comes to negotiating those rather critical elements of the working conditions, securing wages, better access to health care, workplace safety, more reasonable and predictable hours, as well as dispute settlement. How well have they performed in that regard? And are those who are paying membership to those organizations pleased with the work that they've been doing?
Well, first and foremost, I will agree with Phakamile entirely that it has never been more important for workers to be organized now. We refer to unions as being a form of organization. It depends on the type of organization. Work is changing, and the workplaces are changing. In the past period, unions have actually done extremely well, given the difficulties they face, in terms of getting better wages, better conditions. And certainly unionized workers, and that goes without saying throughout the world, those who are organized, those who are unionized get better conditions, better wages than those that are not. That's a fact, a simple fact. However, what's happened is that the nature of work is changing. It's changed, and it's changing very, very rapidly because of machine learning, because of automation driven by artificial intelligence. We now have to adapt. We now have a situation, particularly in South Africa, where I would argue, because we cannot regard someone who works for 1 hour or 5 hours a week as being employed. They're classified in our stats as employed. We could not regard them as fully employed. We cannot regard someone who sells a few sweets on the street corner as employed. If we add all those people together, the grossly underemployed and the unemployed, I would argue that more than half of the potential workforce of this country is actually part of the poor unemployed. So we have a chronic situation which is becoming more chronic because the employment situation within the system has allowed the fragmentation of workers. It's being promoted also by those groups that start to turn one group of workers against another, whether they be foreigners or whatever you want to call them, or aliens. That's a nonsense. The point is, turning workers against workers is one of the things that plays into the hands of the bosses. In fact, we now have a gig economy with part-time work, precarious work, and unions have to begin now to adjust, not adapt to the system and accept it. No way. They have to absolutely adjust to creating a new form of organization.
So Terry, we're going to come back to that. Sorry, I got to step in here. Labor relations in a digital age, and what that actually means, and what unions are looking at in terms of tools to come in there. But Rich, let's bring you in here. If we look at the current trend in unionization, Phakamile already referred to it. Terry is referring to it as well. This informalization. Not only that, but there is currently a perceived trend of unions aging. You, particularly, your union, seems to be attracting a younger audience. Are young people interested in being unionized?
Thank you, Comrade Thabo, and the panel. I believe it's true that the old is dying. The old is dying, and that is why Young Nurses Indaba Trade Union was actually formed to be an alternative. And that even the word itself, even though we are saying it doesn't refer to age, but it refers to radicalism and a new way of doing things. But our existence, more especially in the public sector, young people were not interested in unionism. Those who were interested, they were interested because of the unions that were actually promising them positions, and more especially in our sector, in nursing in particular, where people will just go in unionism, not because they want to stage a war against any form of injustice and defend workers, but they are just looking at their own selfish interest to say, I want to be an operational manager one day, therefore if I join this union and be active, I will climb the ladder. Until then, you will need to come in to say, no, comrades, we can't fold our arms and look at our government butchering workers on the floor, nurses who are frustrated, all healthcare workers getting poverty level salaries and all that. Our existence has actually attracted young people. Now young people on the ground can see that this country, if we are going to fold our arms and wait for a Jesus to fall from the sky somewhere and come to rescue us from our misery, we are going to look at, we will see our profession in the graveyard one day. So in as far as unionism is concerned, Young Nurses Indaba has actually attracted here in the public sector, and we staged a war. That is why it's very, Phakamile is right when she says unionism is more important now than before. Remember, COVID-19 contract workers, community service professional nurses were shown that door until we waged a war and marched to Gauteng Department of Health. Indeed, unions are very important, and it's needed to unite more now than before.
Yeah, we'll talk more on what you're raising here in terms of unity and whether or not the density of unions in the country is part of the contribution to the erosion of the power of unions. But Xolani, let's bring you in here. I mean, part of the big issue today that is probably even at the heart of the disruptions that we saw in the Northwest is this issue of a collective bargaining agreement that seemingly government has turned its back on. Has collective bargaining been successful in workers actually gaining a voice in the workplace? Have you negotiated something that is solid, that has been able to give workers a voice in the workplace through that forum called collective bargaining?
Thank you very much, Thabo. Firstly, let me greet you, let me greet the viewers, and also let me greet the fellow panelists as well on this important day, our day as workers, a day really which reminds us also of our struggles that we continue to face on a daily basis. What we would have preferred, Thabo, is that we would have preferred really to have our event there in Rustenburg running its full course. The disruptions were unfortunate. However, one has to speak to one or two things. And one of those is that our view, in particular as public servants, that one of our chief enemies actually becomes austerity measures. Now, this is austerity measures on public services that we believe are being brought in through the back door without a popular mandate. And that is what we really want to emphasize. We are living already in a country whereby we are already not absorbing young nurses, young teachers, young police officials, yet we desire to see ourselves as a developmental state. So it already tells you that even all those lofty ambitions that we have in the National Development Plan, which all of us actually affirmed, are likely to be a far-fetched dream if we do not have a strong state. If we've got public sector workers who actually feel demoralized because there is a particular collective agreement that is not necessarily being honored, it really becomes a problem. And we are saying that these are some of the things that we need to look into carefully. But what for us is very clear, Thabo, is that we are really struggling with what is clearly austerity measures being brought into the public service. And we want to emphasize this as well, that collective bargaining has to a great extent actually helped to advance our cause as workers. It really has. However, it is also our view that currently collective bargaining is indeed under attack in one way or the other. Yeah. That is why it would have been important for us as workers today to meet on May Day, our day, to even take stock of even the challenges that currently we are facing. And therefore, we are also calling for unity. It is a fact that in South Africa, we are already seeing a fragmentation, if not a proliferation of unions. And yet, at the same time, we are seeing declining union density. So it is an indictment of all of us as unions from across the ideological spectrum. It becomes important that we also reflect and really look back into what is it that we need to do differently. Because what is clear, and I want to agree also with my fellow panelists here, is that unions are now more relevant than ever. They are more relevant because we are now seeing challenges that have been brought in through, for instance, the phenomenon of casualization, amongst others. And we are saying that we really need to unite. We need to speak with that voice so that the bosses can know that indeed, united, we can only be stronger.
Yeah. Phakamile, but will they continue to be relevant, particularly to a large, diverse majority, right? In other words, will unions continue to be large membership organizations representing the full diversity of today's workforce, or will they resign to being smaller and potentially speaking to a minority? Please unmute.
Who do you wish to answer that?
Phakamile.
Yeah, sorry about that. There is no doubt that unions are going to be relevant and continue to be relevant in the future, particularly when you look at how COVID-19 exposed the very deep issues that are affecting the working class, the deep, deep structural poverty and inequality caused by the existing capitalist system. And as long as that is in place, workers are always going to want to be organized or to fight against the system. Now, your question about, the structure of unions is a very good one, because it ties in very well with what Terry was talking about earlier, about how unions actually have to evolve with the changing circumstances. We've already had to evolve because of what COVID-19 did in terms of lockdown, limiting us meeting, limiting our interactions. But at the same time, what COVID-19 also did was to create a new normal of more isolated work, normalizing that working from home, normalizing the gig economy, normalizing precarious work and limited hours. So what we have to do is to evolve in a way that will make us relevant. Now, to speak to your question of relevance, not too long ago, you had a historical incident happening in America where workers at Amazon organized themselves to the extent where now there is a recognized union at Amazon, where nobody thought such a thing was possible, given the relentless attack that Amazon management was waging on workers. They did the impossible and actually established trade unions. And that already in itself speaks to the fact that there is a real hunger for that type of organization, for that type of system, if I can put it that way, where you have structures like trade unions whose job it is to defend workers' rights on the shop floor, and give workers a voice. Because when workers are not organized, there's no way they can speak for themselves as individuals to management and make the kinds of changes that are needed in order to radically improve conditions. The question here, I think, that we all need to contend with is, how do we adjust ourselves to COVID-19? How do we adjust ourselves to the fourth industrial revolution and what it's bringing with artificial intelligence into the workplace, reducing the workplace? How do we deal with all of those, this modernization and modern society?
Right.
But our existence and our need to exist is absolutely crucial as we go into the future.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. I see Terry itching to come in on that as well, so we'll give you an opportunity. But Babu Vilakazi, I want you to talk to me a little bit more about what you have mentioned, individuals who used to be in the unions now leading the executive. I mean, you'd think of the president, you would think of the Minister of Mineral Resources. You have a plan, it seems, on how you're going to deal with them, because you're seemingly saying they think because they know you and therefore they know your ways and they can counter strategize to what you are trying to do. Let's talk a little bit more on that when we continue in a moment. Welcome back live with us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, your Workers' Day conversation. Deputy President of NUM, Vilakazi, with us. Xolani Fakude speaks on behalf of SADTU. We also have Young Nurses Indaba Trade Union President Sicina, National Union of Metal Workers, South Africa spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, as well as labor expert Terry Bell. Before the break, Vilakazi, I was saying I was going to come to you. Why is it, do you think, that you have failed? I mean, within the federation, there was, of course, great support for the Cyril Ramaphosa administration. One of the first to have raised your hand to say we support this administration. But you have failed to convince even that unionist and some of those who are in his cabinet to prioritize things like collective bargaining agreements. You're saying what is behind that?
Thabo, I think it's important that we give a snapshot of the role of the federation in the alliance. When we prefer individuals as leaders of the lead of the alliance in the form of the African National Congress, we don't look people in terms of friendship. We have done that in 2007 when we elected Comrade Jacob Zuma. We have repeated the same in electing Cyril Ramaphosa, and I'm including their administration. Here is a situation that the public must get very clear. When we deploy comrades into the public office, the understanding is that they will champion the views and the interest of the poor, and the working class. What is even disturbing us is because it seems these comrades, once they get into Pretoria, that union building, they get a mandate from somewhere. And that particular somewhere is disturbing us because they impose decision on us instead of discussing with us. It's our understanding that if you are deployed, you must go back and seek mandate on issues that needs to be addressed by the public. Amongst others, just to cite simple examples, is this issue of public sector wage agreement? Is this issue of just transition? We are saying, where we are sitting, South African leaders are quick to take decision without a thorough analysis. Let me give you a living example. If you are saying there is going to be a just energy transition, where are you putting Mpumalanga? Because the coal and the power stations, if you do away with those, it means the province called Mpumalanga by its own existence will cease to exist. We are saying as a federation or as a union in this space, there is nothing for us without us.
Yeah.
What is just energy transition?
Yeah.
We are not against any digitalization, but we are saying the disruption of digitalization or any form that interrupts the working space must be discussed with us so that we understand who is to be trained to be equal to the task.
Yeah. So are you saying all the policies and interventions implemented in this administration and maybe even the previous administration in the last decade have completely failed, and you were clear that they were going to fail, and you articulated that they were going to fail, and you were not listened to because, well, I suppose you thought those who are coming into power are your friends and they'll probably do better for you?
Let me correct the word friends. They are not friends, they are comrades.
Yeah.
We don't deal with friends in our space. That is why if you sleep the next morning, if you change your language, it's none of my business. It will be out of your dreams. Reality here is, these policies, we called order from the National Development Plan. We said this wish list does not address issues of the poor and the workers in particular. We are saying these things must have a clear, meaningful program where it is measurable. To say, if we are saying we are going to alleviate poverty, we are going to create 10% of jobs, either private or public. What do you mean? In which department? In which category? Because from where I'm sitting, any person who has done human resource will tell you, any business has got a business plan. It's either you amend to reduce or you amend to increase. We are sitting with the administration that they want to contract throughout, because through contracts, that's where workers are exploited. We have a suspicion that says, for the fact that our comrades are not asking us about what needs to happen, people have decided to say, instead of us wasting time to talk to these people, let us act. And one of the actions is started in 2016. If we have checked the local government election results, if we have checked the November 2021 local government results, you can see the anger of the public workers in particular to say, we cannot keep on making people to be in office that they forget what is their public office mandate.
Terry, let's bring you in here. Unions, will they continue to be relevant in the digital age, in the sense that will they have, and do they have even now, with the reduced effect of bargaining council on a downward trend? We've already spoken about more and more hollowing of the middle. You've got the higher earning, you've got the lower earning or the unemployed, but the hollowing of the middle through informalization or casual contracts, which Vilakazi has also just mentioned. And, of course, the gig economy also coming into play. Does Labour in South Africa have those tools to be able to adapt to these changing situations?
Well, the point very simply is, and that's one thing that everyone seems to ignore, is that the union movement, the labour movement of organised labour, organises workers as workers, irrespective of their differences. It's the vast army of defence of the working class. It's not a change of the system. It is an organisation which is to defend workers against the system. Now, the biggest employer in the country happens to be the government. You do not get into bed with your employer. That's one of the basic rules of trade unionism. Unfortunately, we've broken that many times over, and certainly the comrade from the comrade Vilakazi will know that. The point is, you've had Zokwana, if you want to talk about a previous president who became a minister, immediately moved from president of the Union of National Union of Mine Workers into becoming the agriculture minister, where he was found to have underpaid his farm workers, but that's beside the point. Gwedi Mantashe is another one, Ramaphosa. We can just name the numbers who have just gone on this conveyor belt, because the system changes the people. The people do not change the system. If you go into that, the point about the unions, and this is where I think we've gone very wrong, that the unions themselves should be the defending body of the working class, not part and parcel of a government, which is what has actually happened. And what then happens is they get subsumed, they get corrupted, they get changed. And I think that's what we are dealing with at the moment. Now, yes, we're seeing now the splits happening, etc. We've seen the breakaway of SADTU and NUMSA, etc. The point is that we do not now need to have, as Julius Malema, I see today, said, we'll start another new EFF union. The last thing we need are politically affiliated unions. We need unions that have principles and who will support political movements that support those principles.
But sorry, Terry, let me come in here. Will that not be the future, though, of unions, where unions are going to be replaced by other forms of social action and protection?
Correct, but the unions themselves could adapt to that. Some of the unions, if they wake up to it. The majority of unions at the moment still appear to be fighting the battles of the 20th century, when in fact we're in the 21st century. And this is the major problem. So the point is, yes, some unions can adapt and adjust. I believe they will. I think that many of them won't and will fall by the wayside. In the meantime, you'll have all sorts of other groups moving up and moving into it, and it could be quite messy, where you have employers. Don't forget, employers will also try and set up their own little groups and unions, little so-called what used to be known as yellow unions, etc. You'll have NGOs setting up some sort of worker organizations. As long as they are collecting workers together in the interests of the workers, I can't see any problem. But something has to change, and it's got to change fairly radically, because at the moment what we have is a relative degree of anarchy, where a large number of people are now completely lost, within the working class. They have no organization, no direction, and it makes a wonderfully fertile ground for populists and demagogues who will push various agendas which, by and large, support the very capitalist employing class that they should be opposing.
Let's take a break. We'll come back, get a sense from Rich. What is the current composition as far as union membership is concerned? Have unions been relevant in the past decade in shaping the workplace? That's the question we're asking tonight. By the way, you can send us your views and your thoughts tonight. 072-110-5584. Tweet us at Newzroom405. Our panel conversation tonight. We have SADTU. We have the young nurses Indaba. We have NUM, and we've got NUMSA as well as a labor expert with us tonight. Rich, let's come back to you. Reflect for me on what you think it is, especially if you look at the current composition of union membership and union density. You had mentioned earlier on this question of unity. Now, there's a conversation that you and I had the other day, particularly around the nurses in Gauteng, and it turned out in that conversation you were being left out of a boardroom conversation that was happening with another union, yet the employer was not talking to you directly on some of these matters. What is your reflection on that, and how this impacts or even weakens the strength of collective bargaining?
You know what? One of our pillars as young nurses in the trade union is unity, and I often say to people, uniting Africans is some form of impossible dream. And because we are radical like that, we are not scared to run after impossible things. Uniting unionists in particular, we can unite workers on the ground, but not in the form of if we are speaking the truth, uniting DINOSA and Wainitu as well as Nehau, for example, it's not going to happen anytime soon, because people in those particular organizations, majority of them, they are just not there to push the revolution and liberate people and workers on the ground. They are just there for their own selfish gains. So when we talk about unity, usually we say in our corridors as well, I need you to say there's the only way we can actually unite ourselves as working class, black working class in particular, is if we sing from the same hymn under one umbrella. So in public sector, we say Wainitu is an alternative. The fastest growing union in South Africa, the most militant radical, and we are saying everyone must come and actually let's stage a war together against all these forms of injustices that are happening. We are frustrated, Comrade Thabo. We are frustrated. We are getting poverty level salaries. Our buildings, healthcare establishments are dilapidated. There are blankets and buckets everywhere because there are leakages. And there are unions who have been there for more than 20 years, and we are facing such things. That is why now, for us to get into that bargaining council, we have made peace with the fact that nobody wants us. Nobody wants to say, let's have a working together agreement with you. I need to. It's because we are speaking a different language, not a language where we will be able to please the employer and please those in positions of authority. We are saying, if it's nonsense, if we say it like it is nonsense. As a result, we need 22,500 members in order for us to get into that bargaining council. And we've told ourselves that we are not lazy. We are working the ground, and we are going to see ourselves there, because at the moment we are sitting at plus or minus 17,000 members on PESAL, by the way, because for us to get into bargaining council, we need members on PESAL. We are working very hard, but unity and with unions, with other unions in the public sector, and we don't see it happening. So the only thing we can do is to recruit on the ground and defend workers and actually service them so that they actually can see that here is an alternative. The old is dead. Yeah. But in as far as unity, it is very important. But as in Wainetu, we don't see it happening. All right. Those people don't care about workers.
Xolani, let's bring you in here. I mean, is this the beginning of the end in as far as the relationship between Labour and President Cyril Ramaphosa, right? If you look at the options that unions have, they either are going to go into dualism of some sort, where unions will no longer be speaking to large organizations. They'll represent those individuals, those interest groups, or they'll be replaced altogether, as I mentioned, according to the IOL, by social action and protection groups. Or they'll be revitalized, and one of the ways of being revitalized is what has been mentioned here. Terry has already mentioned it. Break ties completely with political parties. Is this the beginning of an end?
Thabo, firstly, just before I respond to that, one just has to quickly touch on one issue. In our view, it is also important that in this conversation, also we're having it, we should not forget that there is about 43.5% young people between the ages of 24 and 35 who are unemployed. Now, in COSATU, for instance, we talk about what we call the Right to Work campaign. But now, the issue here, Thabo, is that we must also hold the private sector accountable. I was listening, and I appreciate also what the fellow panelists here are saying in the context of the responsibilities that the governing party has in terms of laying the laws and making sure that at least we have an implementation of such. However, we know that in this country, we are facing what we call an investment strike by the private sector in particular. So we've got all those agreements at the level of NEDLEC that speak to the employment of young people, that speaks to creating jobs, to making sure that we acquire services and other products from within local companies, women-owned, etc. So what we're saying is that there needs to be accountability at all levels. We want to hold the government accountable. We want to hold the ruling party. In fact, we are already doing that, in particular as COSATU unions. But let us not forget the private sector. Let them also take responsibility for what we believe is getting close to a generational catastrophe for us as a country. In terms of our relationship as unions with the president of the ANC and the president of the country, in our view, about what we are busy right now, a serious conversation that we are having is one around a reconfigured alliance. Not just a reconfigured alliance. I mean, SADTU has just gone through most of its provincial conferences right now. And one thing that comes up very sharply is that education workers are saying that they want to exist in the alliance, but in a context of a reconfigured alliance, so that we can also be in a position to influence policy more decisively, more than anything else. And that is what we really want to focus on. And we are saying that we also need other interventions, and those interventions must be taken by us in particular, as unionists, as activists, and those that indeed want to see workers struggles advancing. And one of those conversations we need to have is around unity. We honestly need to have that conversation. We are still saying that at some point, we need to move towards a one sector, or rather one industry, one union, and so forth. We've been having all those conversations because we believe that our power as workers in particular, when we speak about collective bargaining at all levels, it is all about unity. It is all about how we can unite so that the bosses who even divide us as workers, they are the very same bosses, by the way, Thabo, who are even distorting the labor market, such that South Africans are even inherently disadvantaged from other forms of jobs, such as in the hospitality industry, for instance. And we're saying both the private sector must take accountability, must take responsibility, because they're even dividing workers. The Department of Labor must take responsibility for the labor inspectorate services to make sure that our brothers and sisters from other countries do not come here to receive slave wages and even distort the labor market to an extent that others are completely isolated from participating in there. So we are still calling for unity. We believe that indeed unions are still relevant, and we still will indeed find a way through some of our difficulties.
All right. A quick 2 minutes that's left. I'm going to give you, Pax, a minute, and I'll give Vilakazi a minute as well. But a quick minute for you, Pax. Reflect on how unions have dealt with wage inequality, especially when it comes to equal pay for equal work.
Well, I certainly agree with a lot of the sentiments, certainly with regards to the unity of workers. I do believe that, and NUMSA has always been very clear on this position, that the working class has to unite. We were united under the banner of the liberation movement when we were fighting against apartheid, and we were successful in defeating apartheid because on the shop floor there was one demand, and that demand was to destroy the system. But I think we must also be honest, and I think Comrade Rich from Wainutu captured it perfectly, because we have to be honest about why we can't unite. And part of the reason is that there is an ideological question that has to be answered, and it creates a lot of problems when you have to manage relationships with the governing party, which is effectively attacking workers, but at the same time, trade unions have relationships with that governing party. And I think those are conversations that must be had, because at the end of the day, those relationships undermine the struggle of what we are trying to achieve broadly. But I also think that on the issue of wage inequality, trade unions have been very successful, certainly historically, in raising the wage gap from the lowest paid. We haven't obviously arrived at where we want to be. NUMSA's demand has always been for a living wage, and we believe that we have not yet achieved that. And we will continue to make that demand. But the gains that we've made thus far have assisted us. The fact that we now at least have a national minimum wage, albeit a low one, the fact that low wages in certain sectors like garage workers have improved, and other sectors have improved, and all of that has been because of the hard work that trade unions put in. At the end of the day, we cannot compromise on the demands of workers, because when we do that, we undermine ourselves in the long run.
Completely out of time. But Vilakazi, let me give you this final word. Many of the NUM members on the ground today is saying this is the beginning of more such action. In other words, a beginning of an end in terms of where your roads part with this current administration. Will you support that view? Are we likely going to be seeing more booing of President Ramaphosa going forward if your demands are not being addressed?
Well, you can still stick with one slogan, Phambili basebenzi.
All right, Vilakazi, quick one.
Well, one thing for sure that we are going to do is to ensure that anyone who is not taking us serious is going to feel us. The unbundling of ESCOM without our mandate, the situation taking place in the SOEs, and the attitude of public officials who can clearly tell us that they are not shop stewards, but being the public office bearers. Valibambe, lingashoni, asikali, siyachubeka.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much for coming on. Rich Sicina, Philip Vilakazi, Terry Bell, Xolani, Fakude, and Phakamile Hlubi-Majola.